Today is October 17th, 2024. My name is Nia Salway, and joining us remotely for an oral history interview is Bruce Johnson, a descendant of the Fraction family. This interview is a part of an oral history project that is documenting the family histories of descendants of the Fractions and the Prestons, whose ancestors lived at Solitude and Smithfield plantations in Blacksburg, Virginia. Thank you, Bruce, for your willingness to participate in this project. Before we get started, do I have your permission to record this interview?
Yes, you do.
Thank you. And as a reminder, you do not have to answer any question that is too personal or makes you feel uncomfortable. We can take a break, pause, or stop the interview at any time, and you will have a chance to review this interview and transcript with the opportunity to make any necessary changes or omit any personal details. So, rolling right into the interview, could you please state your full name for the record?
My name is Bruce Douglas Johnson.
Thank you. Let's start with when and where you were born.
I was born on July 18th, 1962 in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Tell me about your family and what it was like growing up there in Minneapolis.
So I have two brothers, Mickey, who is my older brother, and Greg, who is my younger brother. And I have two sisters, Valerie, who's the oldest, and Jennifer, who is 2 years older than me. I am the fourth out of five kids. And most of my memory growing up was in Crystal. For the first, I don't know, 4 years of my life, we lived in South Minneapolis. I don't have many memories of living in South Minneapolis, but we moved out into Crystal, Minnesota, the suburbs of Minneapolis in 1966, and we lived in the house. Well, my brother still lives in the same house that uh, we grew up in, but I lived there until I moved out, and when I was 19 years old. And I felt that my upbringing was a normal upbringing, nothing really bad that I can think of going on. I went to Crystal Heights Elementary School, which no longer exists in Crystal. And then I went to middle school at Sandburg Junior High School. And then I graduated from Armstrong High School in Plymouth, Minnesota in 1980.
Okay, can you share with me some of your favorite memories from your childhood growing up in Crystal with your family?
So I have some memories. Some of my favorite memories was when my grandmother, Opal Fraction, she lived with us for a while. Both my parents worked. My dad worked for Dayton Hudson Corporation, and then he went on to work for Target's stores. And then my mother was a human resources officer for First Bank Minneapolis at the time. And so there was times that our grandmothers, both of my grandmothers on my dad's side and my mom's side, would live with us and take care of us, especially when we were younger. And one of the things I remember most about my grandmother was that my grandma Fraction, as we called her, was her love for wrestling, the TV wrestling. And we call it wrestling. It's not wrestling, it was wrestling. And I remember sitting in her room with her watching wrestling, and she'd always be screaming and yelling at the bad guys and cheering for the good guys. It was just an amazing thing. So that was a memory of mine. I remember going to camp a lot. My mom and dad allowed me to go to camp when I was young. I went to a YMCA camp in Wisconsin. Uh, I'm trying to remember the name of it, what the name of the camp was. A Camp Acagua, I think is what it was. And it was a YMCA camp. It was for 2 weeks, and I begged my mom and dad to let me go. They let me go, and I absolutely loved it. And then I eventually went back to that camp to work as a junior counselor when I was in my early teens. I also went to camp at a place called Timber Bay in northern Minnesota. And I started going there with a neighbor of mine who in junior high school. And then I continued to go to Timber Bay um, camping as a teenager until almost when I graduated from high school. And let's see, I liked the fact that all our neighborhoods where I grew up had ice skating rinks, neighborhood rinks. And so I used to skate a lot. I never had really good ice skates. I remember having figure skates and I really wanted hockey skates, and but I had to do what I had to deal with it, what I had to deal. And so I ended up playing hockey and figure skates or whatever. And then we just started playing broom ball. But I spent a lot of time down at the skating rink at night, playing with friends and in just enjoying the outdoors. And then I started working at the YMCA when I was 14 years old and became a certified lifeguard. And from that, I became a swimming instructor. I coached basketball. I taught gymnastics and just had fun at the YMCA for the longest time. It was real close to my house. It was in New Hope, Minnesota. And I worked there as a lifeguard for several years, all through high school. I thought it was a great job, better than working at like McDonald's or something like that. So, um, but I remember my childhood as being, like I said, somewhat normal. I did have to work early on. I always thought we were rich, but my mom and dad were just middle class people, and they taught us how to take care of ourselves, and they taught us how to um, what would be the word? They they taught us how to respect money and how money can help you and hurt you all at the same time. And they taught me the value of money, and they taught me the value of hard work, and they also taught me don't let anything get in your way. Um, you're gonna get kicked down. You're gonna get pushed down. Don't let that stop you, and just keep moving forward. And so I just felt I had a normal childhood. High school was, I was an average student in high school. I didn't try that hard, but I didn't. I probably could have done way better in high school now that I'm thinking back um, than I actually did, because I didn't find it overly difficult. Um, I was having a lot of fun with my friends, and I had good friends, smart friends that did well in school, so I wasn't a bum either or anything like that. But occasionally skip out of school and things like that. But I didn't get in a lot of trouble. Um, Never got arrested by the police. I just had a normal background, normal childhood.
And it sounds like you were very active as well. It sounds like you didn't just put yourself into situations, but you were also encouraged to put yourself into extracurriculars that kind of put you in a good, busy position rather than a bad, busy position.
Right. My mom and dad always encouraged us. They didn't tell us what to do. They just encouraged us to do something, whatever it is. And they always told us to, go out and be who you are, but never forget who you are. My dad, in particular, would always tell me, never forget where you came from. And I haven't. And um, they encouraged us to get out there and don't be discouraged. And so I would try new things. I would adventure out. I think I adventured out more than my brothers and sisters did outside of the Twin Cities going up at camp. Um, when I graduated from high school, me and a few buddies of mine did a 14-day canoe trip in the Bongewater canoe area by ourselves. My mom and dad were probably freaked out about that. I also had done canoe trips, boat trips, not canoes, but boat trips with my dad. And I had a neighbor who had a developmentally disabled daughter, who was like a second dad to me. He took me in, and I was over there a lot with him and his wife. He was a he was many things. He was a reporter. He was a advertising person, and he opened up my eyes to areas that my dad uh, did not have the ability to do or had the background to do. And so he had a cabin as well up by St. Cloud, Minnesota. So I'd go up into that cabin as well. So that's where my love of outdoors probably came from. I've always trying to get out somewhere. And so, and I also learned early on, if I earn my own money, I can spend my own money the way I want to spend it. And I don't have to ask my parents for money and get questioned about where I spent my money. So they taught us the value of money, and they taught us to work hard, but don't be afraid to try new things.
Yeah, I love that. That's really great teaching to hold, not just through your upbringing, but going into your adulthood and throughout your adulthood.
Well, yeah, and I that's what I taught my children, and is, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to always give you my advice on things, but you got to choose your own path in life. But there are certain things that you need to avoid and watch out for, and not everybody's going to be your friend, and you need to understand that. So,
That kind of is relevant to what I was going to ask you. You kind of brought up how your parents sort of prepared you, in a sense, for certain hurdles that you'll encounter throughout life. And I'm just curious, like throughout your upbringing, especially like your childhood and your teenage years, were there any moments that you took that advice with you, any through any hardships or challenges that you were experiencing?
I guess, yeah, there was a time when I was working for the YMCA. I hope this answers your question. When I was working for the YMCA, they offered me a scholarship for college, and I was very happy to get a scholarship for college. What I didn't understand is the fine print. And so I got accepted into a college called George Williams College in Downers Grove, Illinois. I went down there not knowing that the scholarship they gave me was only for $1,500. I didn't check anything out. And when I got down there, I realized very quickly that I could only stay in school for one semester. And so I only was able to go to school for one semester. And I had to move back home. And my mom and dad didn't question me. They didn't say, I told you so. They just took me back, encouraged me to keep going to school, which I did. And it was frustrating for me. I was actually, um, like a year or so later, threatened with collection for an outstanding debt at this college. And so it was a lesson that I learned, but my parents, through the whole thing, just said, just keep moving forward. Don't don't let this setback keep you from doing what you need to do. And then another time, my parents really helped me out in a bad time. I was also working for the YMCA, and I used to be what they called a building supervisor. And so I would open up the building in the morning before everybody got there, and then all the swimmers and things would come in. And one of the early morning swimmers was the bank president of the local bank in New Hope. And I got talking to him, and he said, hey, we need to hire bank tellers. Would you be interested? And I said, sure, I'd be interested. And so I went over there, and they hired me, and they put me into an auto bank teller kiosk or whatever. It was a little outbuilding for auto banking. And I was working there for, I don't know, couple of months or something like that. And about one night, there was a snowstorm, and I worked with three other people, all women, all white, all young. And I was talking to them one night. We were just sitting there talking. It was bored. It was a snowstorm. There wasn't a lot of traffic in the bank. And somehow the talk of salary came up. And I think at the time I was getting paid like $4.25 an hour. And the girl that was there, she was in one of these high school work programs at the time. She was only making $3.50 an hour. And I said, wow, that's weird, because they say they started everybody at $4.25 an hour. And I'm like, huh. And then as we were talking, one of the girls said to me, you know, I got to ask you a question. And I said, well, what is that? And she said, well, the drive up bank manager says you're a mulatto. And I said, what? And she says, you're a mulatto. And I said, well, first of all, no. Second of all, my parents are both Black. I don't know where she got this from. And, but I just kind of blew it off, because I really hadn't experienced racism up until this point, at least that I was aware of. And 2 days later, I came in to go pick up my bank check, and they fired me. And I couldn't understand why. And later I found out, well, then I called my mom, because she was a human resources officer, and she jumped in. And long story short, the manager of the drive up bank, who was also a white woman, was racist and didn't want me there. And she was protecting these young white women from this young Black man in there. And I found out before I was hired, she had sat each one of these women down and asked them if they were okay working with a Black man. And I couldn't believe this. This is the first time I really experienced racism like this. And my mother in that, and my dad, more my mom, my dad just was kind of quiet in this, because my mom was all over it. Basically just, encourage me to keep moving forward again. You're going to run into these people all your life. You just have to learn how to deal with them. The problem is theirs, not yours. And just forget them and keep pushing forward. And that is the way I have lived my entire life. I've encountered racism. Other times I had people, when I was growing up in Crystal, somebody one day wrote niggers in front of our house. I was young at the time, and there wasn't a lot of Black families in the suburbs when I was growing up. So most of my friends were white. The only Black people that were in school were my brothers and sisters. And so when I went to dances, I went with white girls. And I remember one particular time, a mother of one came by and told us she did not want her daughter dating niggers, and to my face. And so that was a rude awakening for me. And but it didn't discourage me at all, because my mom and dad said, don't let this discourage you. And they were living proof of, they grew up during World War II. They grew up in the 40s, 30s, and experienced racism that I could never even begin to comprehend. And they made it. So I figured, if they can make it with way worse than what I went through, I can get past some lady that works at a bank that probably never went further than bank manager um, uh, at that little bank, and some crazy mother who didn't understand who I was. She only saw me for the color of my skin, and that was it. She could not see beyond that. And so um, my parents were very influential to me, and they were the ones that allowed me to be who I am, because they allowed me to be who I am. They didn't force me to do anything. They didn't tell me this is what you have to do, or this is the job you need to work in, or this is where you need to live, or this is who you need to marry. They told me, you be yourself, and nobody can take that away from you, and nobody ever has, and nobody ever will.
I love that message, and it seems like they shared that with your siblings as well. I seem to be consistent in the stories that you guys have shared with me. Um, Thank you as well. I want to thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that experience with me. I'm curious to know more about your parents, however, more about them, what you remember about them growing up, and how your interactions with them, but also what you remember about them as individuals.
Um, well, my dad was kind of a quiet person, but he was very funny. It could be very funny. He was a jokester, liked to play pranks. Like we had a bicentennial barbecue neighborhood picnic in our neighborhood, and so we had all the neighbors come down to our house and my neighbor's house, and we had a big block party. And one of the things that we were doing is roasting a pig. And my next door neighbor and I were sleeping in a tent outside in the backyard. And my dad and my other neighbor, his name was Phil Schrader. Phil was the neighbor that had the developmentally disabled daughter. They thought it would be funny to bring the dead pig into the tent while my friend and I were sleeping. And so they snuck into the tent while we were sleeping and laid the dead pig in there. And I just remember they thought it was funny as hell. I didn't think it was so funny. But now when I think back, it is very funny. But I always thought my mom and dad were very sophisticated. My dad was always professional. My dad rarely showed vulnerability. Um, he didn't talk about the past much. I don't know much about my dad's father at all. I think I've only seen one picture. He never talked about the war. He was very private about that. He was in World War II, and he never talked about that. And so I know very little about that. But what my dad would do is encourage me to work hard, um, allowed me to do things, and I never gave him a reason to punish me that much. I found my dad to be very honest. There was a point in my dad's life where he had drank, and looking back, I can understand that why he was under a lot of stress. Um, he's the first generation to get out of the inner city, and there's a lot of things going on, probably more than I actually realized at the time. And so that I have memories, very vivid memories of that. Particularly probably more than my brothers and sisters did because of my age, and most of them were out of the house at the time. Um, that was a difficult time, but he overcame that, and my dad was very supportive of me. But he always reminded, I just never forget it. Don't remember, he'd always say, don't forget who you are and don't forget who you came from. My dad was also the muscle for my mom. My mom used to say, I don't care how big you are, I'll climb up a ladder and I'll knock you down. And if we were getting in trouble or causing problems, and you knew you were in trouble when my mom would turn around and scream, Everett, and get in here. Then I knew I might have crossed the line there. But my mom and dad were partners to the end. Um, they were partners to the end, as I am with my wife. I feel like my relationship with my wife is very similar to my relationship, or my mom and dad's relationship. It is very close. They they did a lot of things together. Um, they were together until they both died. Well, my dad died first, and then my mom died a couple years later. Um, they had tough times. They had a lot of good times, but they were always on the same page, and they never ever um, disagreed with one another in front of us. I guess that's the way I'd say it. They always had a unified front. When it came to the kids, they were very family oriented, and it was all about family. These are your brothers and sisters. You're your mom and dad. We're your parents. We stick together. You. I don't care how much you dislike your younger brother or what your older brother did to you or whatever. Um, but they you stick with family. Family is your number one priority, and I believe that has been my number one priority. I've been with my wife for over 40 years, and we've been married 35. Um, and we are partners at everything that we do, and we also adopted that same approach where we don't disagree about things in front of our kids. We have those disagreements in private, and but the other thing our parents did is they were trusting. They trusted us, and they trusted us to make the right decisions. And even when we got older, um, they trusted us to, we might be out drinking. They say, you need to call us and we'll come get you. Um, don't be driving. I remember my brother got in a little trouble one time and they went down to the jail to get my brother. Didn't ask a question, because they didn't need to, because they knew we knew. And so, but they always gave us what we needed, but they didn't always give us what we wanted. So,
I love that. I love that there was a balance in showing support, but also guidance when you all needed, which is what really any child in any family needs, is support and guidance from their parents.
right. Well, like one of the things that they did was when I started working, I was in high school, and up until I was working, they'd always buy my school supplies. They'd take me school clothes shopping. I always thought that was great. We'd go to Targets. I'd get all these new clothes. Well, when I started working, my parents said, "Well, you have a job. Go out and buy your clothes. Go out and pay for your lunches." So that's what I did. And then I learned there are things that I can live without. Um, and, you don't always need the greatest, latest things. Um, you need what you get, you need what you need, and you get what you get. And so that lesson in particular is I don't own any new cars. I think my wife and I have only bought two new vehicles in our entire life. Um, we always buy used cars. Um, we're thrift store. All my clothes are from the thrift store. And, I got no problems with that. I mean, we could buy new clothes if we wanted to, but, why? You know, there's a lot of really nice clothes super cheap at the thrift store. So why not just get those? So, um, but yeah, I really love my parents. They really were all about family. And I missed out on a lot of that when I left. I moved to Alaska in 1987. And right around that time, my parents moved up to their lake house, which was their dream home. And so I missed out on a lot of those family functions um, for 20, 30 years, however long they were up there. I mean, I'd occasionally go back there. Um, I regret that my kids didn't get to know my parents um, that well, given the distance. And my parents didn't get to know my kids well, but they got to meet them. But uh, you know, it's the distance. But my one, I don't regret moving to Alaska at all, ever. This is where I needed to be. It called me, and this is where I needed to be. So I don't regret leaving. I do miss the fact that I missed a lot of those family functions, which seemed a lot of fun. I mean, and crazy, and I wish my kids would have been able to meet their cousins uh, more often than they were able to meet them.
But I remember in a pre-interview you were sharing a little bit about how you're kind of recreating that. So I think it's beautiful that even though you missed out on some things, you were still able to open up that space for your family that you were building in Alaska to carry on those same traditions.
Right, and that's directly because of my parents, and and to the extent my wife's parents too. My wife's father had a cabin rental business, and we'd go up there a lot. But that is something that I wanted to recreate for my kids because they really missed out on it.
I remember you bringing up your college experience a little bit. Would you mind us returning to that and speaking about what you majored in and your college experience following returning back home and starting anew?
Well, I'll start out this way. I don't have a college degree. I never finished college. I couldn't afford to finish college. Um, I will say this though: both my kids graduated from college. Um, so, and all my grandkids will be set up to graduate from college. Education was very important. I just couldn't afford to do it. And so I had to take the hard work route. But my college experience is this. Like I said, I went to George Williams College in Downers Grove, Illinois. My goal there it was a college that was connected to the YMCA program, and a lot of directors of YMCA facilities went through that college for management. And that's what I thought I wanted to do. And then when that was a bust, I came back to um, Minneapolis, and I had an aunt uh, who was married to another fraction, my Uncle Carl, my Aunt Celeste. She was an educator, and she was married to my Uncle Carl, who was a fraction. And she was an educator at Minneapolis Community College. And so when I came back from George Williams College, I enrolled there, and I actually figured, you know what? When I was down at George Williams College, it was the first time I ever moved out of my house. I had a lot of fun. I probably had more fun than I should have, and I didn't focus on my courses the way I should have focused on them, and my grades weren't the best. When I went to the community college, um, I started there, and I was taking almost a full load of classes. Plus, I was working um, almost full time at First Bank Minneapolis, and I didn't have any kids. I didn't have anything going on. And so when I actually focused, uh, it was easy for me. I was straight A's. I wasn't even trying hard. Um, and one of the psychology classes that I took, I tested out of early because my grade couldn't get any higher than it was already. So I just tested out of the class. And that just told me is like, all right, maybe you do have maybe you're a little bit smarter than you think you are. And so then I went there for a while, but then life got in the way. Um, I think around shortly thereafter, I met my wife and we were dating. I had moved out of the house. I had to pay the rent. My wife and I started living together, and we had to pay rent, and we had to pay for our vehicles because my mom and dad weren't going to just hand me things. I'd moved out. So they're not going to still support me. And so I had to support myself. And I realized I did not want to live back at home. So I wasn't moving back home. That wasn't going to happen. And so I did what I needed to do to support myself. So I ended up having to drop out of college because I couldn't afford it, and started working full time at First Bank Minneapolis. Then took on a part time job at a place called Gordon's Jewelers in Plymouth, Minnesota. And I worked a third job as working catering for a friend of mine's mother. She ran a kosher catering service in Minneapolis. And so I would cater bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, Jewish weddings, things like that. And Renee, my wife, well, she was my girlfriend at the time, she joined us as well. And that's how we survived. And then we eventually moved to Hopkins, Minnesota, and we lived there for several years. And then in 1987, we moved to Alaska. Um, when I at that time I decided maybe, well, at some point, I can't remember when it was. It was probably in the early 2000s. I decided to go back to school. And not because I needed the degree at that time, is because I wanted to prove something to myself that I could do it. And so I started going back, and I was already in the criminal justice system. And so I was going to get a criminal justice degree, but it didn't matter. And eventually I was just like paying a lot of money for something in the end that's not going to change what my salary is. It's not going to change my trajectory and my job. So what is the point of doing that? I don't talk about the fact that I haven't graduated from college. And the reason is because I teach around the country, lawyers, I interview doctors, I, I interview professionals, I train lawyers on how to manage cases, how to present cases in the courtroom, how to strategize their cases, how to do investigations. And these are people that have JDs. These are people that went to school a long time to learn how they do what they do. And I don't have any of that. I've learned on my own. And so I say that I went through this college of hard knocks. I got a PhD in the School of Hard Knocks. And I have learned, I've never forgotten the value of education. So I'm not afraid to learn. I'm not afraid to jump into something unknown. Um, it's the nature of my job, of what I do. And I've managed in the 30 years in the criminal justice system to become the first chief investigator in Alaska in the Federal Defender's Office. I'm the very first one. I've won the National Investigator of the Year twice. For all federal investigators around the country, I've won it twice. I just won it this year. I couldn't believe it. I was actually, yeah, I won it in 2016 and 2024. Um, I managed the investigative unit for the federal public defenders, of which my staff, just my staff alone, has a JD in law, one of my clients, a master's, a BA, and a master's in social work. And I can't remember where the other one is. Let me see. I got BA, PhD. Oh, two BAs, all college graduates, but me. I'm the only one. And but I have good staff. But so, but I, like I said, we, both my wife and I, who worked hard and became, my wife in particular, um, who also didn't graduate from college, um, ended up becoming the director for business development for USDA Alaska, and for about a year was the state director for Alaska, running the USDA Rural Development Agency here in Alaska. And she did that for 20 years. I refer to her as more of a kind of a loan officer. She's retired now. But, you know, we both understood the value of education. We saved everything that we could for our kids. So when they went to college, we could pay for it. And when both my kids graduated from college, they were debt free. They had no debt when they walked across that. And that's allowed them to purchase their own home. They're both married. They both have their own homes, and are doing well. My son is actually picking up the paralegal part of it. He went through my paralegal program that I run. We teach paralegals in Alaska how to manage criminal cases. And we also, I oversee a paralegal intern program with the University of Alaska. So when I get asked about my college background, I'm always a little embarrassed because I never graduated.
That's actually interesting because I'm one to really appreciate the journey that someone goes through to get to the position that they're in. And I think your journey is particularly unique and valuable, especially with you not having a college degree, for you to get to the position that you're in. So I'm curious if you're interested to share with us your journey through the College of Hard Knocks of you getting to entering the criminal justice system and then getting to the point that you're in now with being the chief investigator of the federal office in Alaska.
Well, one of the things that my parents taught me is always look out for opportunity, and opportunity is going to present itself to you. And they also told me that you're going to hit crossroads in your life. Not a lot of them, but a few of them. And when you hit that crossroad, you can go forward, you can go to the right, you can go to the left, but you can't go back. And so they taught me to find opportunity and to take advantage of it when it's presented to you. That's how I've operated. That's how I got to where I am. And this is how it started. It's kind of an interesting story. When I moved to Alaska, I was in banking. I worked at first, well, both my wife and I worked at what they called First Trust in St. Paul, Minnesota. It was an affiliate of First Bank Minneapolis, and it was their trust agency. They dealt in stocks, bonds, things like that. And I was just kind of a clerk, push paper. We moved to Alaska in 1987 after I had met my wife at work, and we started dating, and her dad had moved to Alaska about a month before we met. And so we dated a year before I actually met him. But anyway, I came up to Alaska to meet him, asked for her hand in marriage because that's what you do. And we moved to Alaska. All I knew was banking. And so I figured at that time, and it actually, young Bruce, I always refer to young Bruce. Young Bruce was absolutely correct. This would be the only summer I would have off until I retire. And so I wasn't in a rush to go to work when I got to Alaska. I think we got up in near June of 1987. And then I started looking for a job in August of that year. And I got hired at this place called Alaska Mutual Bank. And my first job here was working with the vice president of operations. I was her assistant. And so I just did whatever needed to be done. I can't even remember half. I did a lot of reconciling and just nonsense. And then Alaska at the time in 1988 the economy was tanking. Actually, when we moved up here, people were leaving in droves, and we were like, people are going, "Why are you moving there? There's no money to be had." And I'm like, I have no mortgage. We have no kids. We have just a small car payment. If it doesn't work, I can always go back to Minneapolis. And so when I did get hired, they offered me two positions. I took the one with the operations manager, and then I said, my wife, she would be really good at this other one, which was in their loan department, if I remember correctly. And then I worked for the vice president of the bank for about 6 months, and then they moved me over into the collections unit because the economy was going bad and people were turning their houses in, and mortgage payments were going in default. And so I was over there, and while I was working there, I met this woman. Her name is Yoyon Farr. Yoyon is a Korean woman who was married to an attorney. And for whatever reason, her and I hit it off, just good friends. And one day she stopped me in the hallway and she said, "Hey, my husband has a paralegal position open. You should apply." Opportunity. The banking industry was tanking. My wife and I figured it's not a good idea to have both our salaries connected to the same income source. And so I figured, why not? The problem was I didn't know what a paralegal was, let alone what a paralegal did. So I went and interviewed for this job with her husband. His name is John Farr, really nice guy. And they hired me. And they said, "Don't worry, we'll train you." And I went, okay. And so, but I got hired on less than what I was making, which is a point that I try to tell my son sometimes. Sometimes you got to take a step backwards in order to leap forward. And so I took a pay cut from what I was making there to go and work with John Farr as this paralegal. I figured maybe there's an opportunity here. And I remember to this day, I tell people about it all the time. I remember to this day, my first day sitting in the office is the first private office I've ever had in my life. And I was sitting in this office in an overlooked 4th Avenue in downtown Anchorage. And I sat at my desk and I just went, what did I just get myself into? And I have no idea what I'm doing. And then I just jumped into it. And he told me basically what he wanted done. And then I just figured it out. If I had questions, I would ask, he'd answer it. But I tried to figure it out, and I did grunt work. I went down to the law library and I pulled cases, and I went down to the court house and I pulled court records, and I started reading court records. And part of his practice was criminal, or half of his practice was criminal work, and the other half was civil. So I got to taste of both. But what kind of got me into it is I realized as I was moving along, I had two things. I had the gift of gab, and I never gave up on something. And I just kept going until I solved it. And so, which is a good trait if you're an investigator. And so, but I didn't even know at the time. And so I was working on a drug case, a marijuana case at the time before marijuana was legal in Alaska. And I had caught the Alaska State Troopers who were investigating the case. They had lied. And I was able to figure out what the lie was in order to get this guy. And so I went through all this thing, and I ran into one roadblock. It was a major one, but they said that they saw a license plate at this particular house, but that was impossible because that guy sold that vehicle in Oregon, and Oregon had destroyed the plate, but Oregon didn't keep track of the plate numbers that they destroyed. So I couldn't prove that that was the plate on the car when it was sold. So, but the co-counsel in that case was a gentleman by the name of Rob Hers. Rob Hers was a state public defender at the time, and he remembered this work. And I worked on it, and he just remembered it, but I didn't hear from him for years. I had John Farr hired an associate, and then money was kind of drying up. He was a private attorney. I'm a paralegal. Paralegals don't bring in new clients. And so he was going to lay me off. And it was right when my daughter was born. My first child was being born. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get laid off. A friend of mine, his name was Steve Samita. He was the associate. He was a good friend of mine. He was the lawyer there, and he had the opportunity to take another job. So he took another job so I could stay, because he had kids too. His wife just had a baby as well. So we had kids the same age. But that left me a little nervous. And so a position came up at the State of Alaska Attorney General's office as a high-level paralegal. Well, actually, let me back this up. 2 years into working for John Farr, I wanted to make sure I was learning something. And a paralegal position came open for a real estate law firm that did foreclosures on trailers and homes and shit like that. Sorry. Anyway, so I went and applied for that job, not thinking that I'd ever get it, because I'd only been doing this job for like 2.5 years. More to just to see if I learned anything. And I'll be damned if they didn't offer me the job. And that was another crossroad that I had to do. I ultimately declined the position because my ultimate goal was to work at home. When my wife and I bought our house, we bought a house 50 miles out of Anchorage, but I worked in Anchorage, so I was commuting. And so my ultimate goal was to work closer to home. And so I declined that position. So this job in the collection and support unit came open. And so I applied, and it just turned out that the attorney that was overseeing that unit was from Minneapolis, and she was a Minnesotan too. And I was the only other Minnesotan that had applied. So she hired me. And so what they did was, it was one unit, but two subunits. There was the collection side and there was the child support side. The support side was they'd go after people that owed child support and do all the stuff related to child support. The collection side was collecting debts for the state of Alaska, particularly past due criminal fines, cost of incarceration, things like that. And so they put me in charge of that. And so I was actually running that unit. And then I had 2 other staff members there that worked for me in my unit. And so that was my first go around at supervising people. But it also just threw me into something that I was unfamiliar with. And I had to navigate my way through this position, which I did. And I developed, and then people within the Attorney General's office realized that, hey, this guy down in collection and support has a knack for finding people and collecting money. And so people would come down to me in other departments and ask me to locate people for them. And I'm like, yeah, hey, that sounds like a lot of fun. And then ultimately, so I was there for about 2 years, 3 years. And then I got a call from Rob Hers. This is now like 5 years later. And Rob says to me, hey, Bruce, I have an investigator. We have a brand new investigator position opening up at the public defender's office in Palmer, which is where I lived. And I'm like, you should apply. And I'm like, hell yes, this is great. I'm going to be able to work out in the Valley. And I've never done criminal defense investigation full time, but I did a little bit, but whatever. And so I went out and interviewed it. It was one of the toughest interviews I've ever done in my life. And then they didn't hire me. And I was devastated. I was like, and he called me and he said, you are our second choice. And I went, yeah, whatever. And he says, if this job ever comes open again, we're going to hire you. And I'm like, sure, you just feel bad. That's what I was thinking. And so I went about my business and continued to better myself, continued to learn. And a year later, Rob called me back and he said, the position is open. It's yours if you want it. And I went, well, that's great, but I'm making more money now than I did last year and I can't go backwards. So you got to match my salary. And so they came back and they said, we can do that. And they hired me on as a full-time investigator. And that's how I became an investigator. And I sat in my desk again going, what did I just get myself into? I don't know what I'm doing here. And for the first 6 months, I had, it was pretty easy. I kind of learned. I had little cases. And then, bam, I got my first homicide that I'd ever worked on, my first murder case. And it was the death of an Alaska State Trooper, of a law enforcement officer. That was my very first case that I ever tried or investigated. And I did that with Rob. And from that moment on, in my 8 years of working with the State Public Defender's Office out in Palmer, I worked on some of the highest, biggest profile murder cases that was in the state. And won some of them, lost most of them, which we should. But during that time working for the State Public Defender's Office, I also joined what they called the Alaska Investigators Association. And somehow I got wrangled onto the board. I don't know how I got wrangled onto the board, but I got wrangled onto the board. But I also then learned that there was federal public defender investigators. And when I found that out, everything that I did from that moment on was focused on getting that job. And I taught myself, I learned everything that I could learn about criminal defense investigations, about forensics, about interviewing techniques, about report writing, everything that I could learn about doing that could position me to get into that position. I learned technology. I was one of the few investigators in the state that embraced the technology at the time. This is when courtroom presentations were first coming out. People were using PowerPoint. We were just getting digital discovery. And so I did everything possible to learn that position. And then I got a call from a gentleman by the name of Rich Kurtner. Rich Kurtner was the federal defender for Alaska. and he says, "Hey, you should apply for our investigator position. We're adding a second one. You should apply." And I'm like, "Awesome. I'm going to finally get to where I want to be." And I went in and applied, didn't get hired. And I was like, Jesus. And I got the same phone call again, this time from Rich, saying, "You were our second choice." In this case, I didn't have too much heartache over it because the person they hired was a gentleman by the name of Frank Wake. And Frank was the chief investigator for the state public defender's office. He was my boss, and he had way more experience than I had. And so I didn't feel so bad about that. But he said, "If position comes open again, it's yours." And I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." Sure enough, a year later, Rich called me and said, "The position's yours if you want." And I jumped on it because I was getting stagnant in salary wise in the state. I was at the top of my pay scale, and it was at the time like $55,000 a year. And I was like, this is not good. And so I jumped shipped big time, and almost doubled my salary in a day when I did that. And so anyway, once I got into the federal court system, I was actually in a hearing within a week. Same thing again. What did I just get myself into? Not knowing, because when you jump from state court to federal court, it's very, very different. People, when they look at the federal government, they think unlimited resources, which is kind of true. And they have the FBI, they had the ATF, the DEA, all these federal agents and stuff and resources, and it's just us. And I didn't know what I was getting into, but I wasn't going to let that hold me back. As my parents had taught me, don't let anything hold you back and learn as much as you can. And that's what I did. And I started learning as much as I could. And I remember my first conference that I went to for investigators was in Chicago. And I had helped a investigator locate a witness in Alaska. He was from New York. And so he's going to buy me a beer down in Chicago. And so we met up at this bar. I had never met him before. Super nice guy. Turns out he's a professor as well at Rutgers University. And I think he's still a professor there. His name is Kevin Murphy. Very bright, smart man. Anyway, he introduced me to this other person by the name of Sean Broderick. Sean Broderick is our national litigation and support director, for lack of a better word. And Sean and I hit it off. And the next thing I know, I'm getting invited to sit on their paralegal investigator conference committee. I get invited to all these other committees, and then I started meeting all these high level people in the federal defender system in Washington, D.C. and all over the country, and starting to meet all these lawyers and things. And it was just one opportunity after the other that was just being presented to me. And I took advantage of every single one of them. And I have been sitting on the National Training Committee for 16 years. I can't even begin to tell you how many conferences I've taught at, but every single one of them I always learn. I'm always looking for something new to learn. And so that in a nutshell is how I got to where I was at. And when I talk about, when I told you about those awards that I got, I'm always surprised by it because I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just did what was right. And that's it. I wasn't out trying to be super investigator. Frankly, I don't think I'm the best investigator in the world. I think there's a lot of investigators out there that are much better than me. They're better writers than me, better interviewers than me. I just do the right thing. And so the first year I won it, I was totally surprised by it. And this year I was one when I when I won it again, I really didn't understand because I haven't done. I'm just doing what my job. That's it, and that's what I was always taught. Just do your job and do what's right. So
Hmm. And it's interesting. It's also a reflection of society in a sense to show that even though you're just doing the right thing, you're just doing what's just, it shows that for that to be extraordinary, that isn't commonplace. But I um I love, thank you. One, I want to say thank you. I really love that throughout your journey you took what your parents told you and always being open and to new things, and especially being willing to learn new things and always learn more things. I think that's probably the most valuable thing I got from you sharing what you told me, because that always helped you elevate and go to a new position. And it also, I feel like, helped you understand your worth, so when you were presented with new opportunities you could decide whether it was aligned with your worth or not. um, but I also wanted to make a little bit of a transition in our conversation and ask, when you started going into learning about your ancestry, about your family connected to Smithfield and Solitude plantations in Blacksburg, Virginia.
well, that's an interesting story. I was actually talking to my sister about that. I think it all started years ago. I was up in Fairbanks. I was working for the Attorney General's office, and I was up in Fairbanks, Alaska. And I had some free time. That the state courthouse is right downtown Fairbanks. And right next to the courthouse is this pioneer uh, monument, or where they put bricks down of all the people that were the pioneers during the time. And so I'm just kind of wandering around there. And lo and behold, I see a brick that says Nevada fraction. And I'm like, what? Because every fraction I had ever met was somehow related to us or was Black. And so I started doing a little research and found out she was living in a nursing home in Fairbanks. So I called the nursing home and asked, is she Black? And they said yes. And I said, can I talk to her? And they said no, they wouldn't let me talk to her for whatever reason. I don't remember why. I don't know if she was in poor health or whatever. And then sometime after that, she had passed. I did a little research on her, trying to figure out more, but I couldn't find much about it. And I recall telling my mom about it. And and then my mom told my uncle Ronnie. I think you interviewed my uncle Ronnie at some point. And my uncle Ronnie came up and he wanted to go see it. And then I think people started getting more interested in who Nevada Fraction was. By the way, she's a rough and tumble person.
I've heard about her.
I think she might have been a gangster. Yes, I think she might have been a gangster of some sort, but she was pretty rough and tumble. Uh, but anyway, that, and then somehow I got Valerie onto it, and I think that's how Valerie started digging. And then it's been more Valerie than me. Um, I've helped Valerie with stuff, locating information on Nevada, giving her ideas of where to search up here. But I kind of left it for a while, several years, and then it just kind of kept popping up, and we kept looking. And I think about 5, 6 years ago, I might have went to ancestry.com or something like that and did a little bit more research on her and found a few more things. And but then Valerie kind of took off, and I think she ended up um, meeting Kerri at some point, and somehow there's this big connection, and then it's just skyrocketed from there. But to be honest with you, um, I still don't know a ton about our. I'm learning more as we go. But I have Kerri's book. I still haven't read it, but I have it. Uh, but I know almost nothing about my dad's side family, and well, beyond his siblings, I don't know much about my dad's family. And so my interest in the Fraction Preston family is becoming more and more um, important because I realize that throughout history, Black families' records were not kept um, or lost, or and so I find it um, interesting that I'm part of a family that at least half of me can be traced back so far back and finding the records. So this is all very fascinating to me. And I tell people about this all the time now.
It is very interesting. It is honestly a very great honor as well to be a Black family and to have a connection to your ancestry. And it's awesome to interview you all and learn so much about how you're learning about your ancestry and the process of you all learning about it. I think it's very beautiful.
So I've been doing a lot of work in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it's similar to Alaska. When I first came to Alaska, I thought I was going to be the only Black person in Alaska. Turns out there's been a lot of Black people in Alaska for a very long time, um, but you don't know about it. In Tulsa, um, I, you know, I learned about the massacre in what is it, Green? Yeah, Green something. I can't remember what it was. Uh, Very affluent, because I think a lot of people think when you look back at history that most Black people were poor and impoverished and living in squalor, and that was not the case. You just don't see it. And in Tulsa, they had Black Wall Street, where there was very affluent people um, there. And I'm finding in the Fraction Descendant, I'm seeing pictures of well dressed, successful African American people that were thriving in a situation that would be difficult. And for me to even understand, through Jim Crow and through um, some of the, coloreds only and all the race riot. I do remember walking with my parents in some of the marches during Martin Luther King's Day. I have memories of doing that. And so it's nice to learn that no, that isn't what really happened. There were successful fractions out there, and I'm sure there was fractions that weren't so successful, but there's a lot of them that were out there, and those are the people that made it possible for me and my brothers and sisters and my parents to succeed. And it's their information and their tenacity that said, don't let this slow you down. Don't let this stop you. And they kept moving forward and they passed that on to the next generation and then the next generation and then the next. And so it is good to see that heritage.
You said you were, with you doing some work with Tulsa, Oklahoma, you're finding images, some pictures. Are there pictures of your relatives, fractions, or?
No, not in Oklahoma. What was interesting to me is, like, I'll give you an example. I was working on a case where it was a murder case down there, but our client, he was a Native American. The reason I'm working down there is there was a lot of cases that were charged in state court that got pushed into federal court because the crime or the person that was alleged to commit the crime were Native American. And so it was either they were Native American or it was on a reservation and they were Native American. And so I went to this counseling center where our client, who was a young Native American man, had gone when he was a teenager. And the psychologist there was this black woman. And in the middle of Muskogee, Oklahoma, or Okmulgee, she was in Okmulgee, Oklahoma, just this little podunk town. And after I got done with my professional part of it, I had to go. I said, I got to ask you something. And she says, what? What are you doing here? Why are you in the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma? And she goes, oh, our family has a huge ranch farm here. And I went, what? And they go, yeah, no, we have a huge ranch that our family has owned for years. And I'm like, what? And it didn't make sense to me. The connection was, I just figured there would be white people and Native American people. But once you started looking around in that area, you see a lot of Native Americans. You can't tell who's black and who's American Indian and what. You just can't tell. I saw my first black cowboy down there. I was just amazed. And so that's because, I've lived in predominantly white areas but so anyway, Tulsa, we don't have any family down there, but the more I learned, the more you realize black people were an integral part of Tulsa's and Oklahoma's history. And I find it all over the place. I travel all over the northern and eastern district of Oklahoma, and it's just amazing to me. Just amazing.
That is amazing. Do you recall any other stories that were passed down through your family, either from your parents or other relatives throughout your childhood or your lifetime in general?
Well, again, my parents didn't. My dad never talked about his past much, so I don't know a whole lot about that. My mother, I remember them talking about growing up in Iowa. My mom lived in Des Moines, Iowa, for a while, um, but I don't remember them telling a lot of stories about their childhood at all that I recall. Maybe my sister or my brothers, they may have told, but I don't have a lot of memories of them talking about their past. They always look to the future.
Okay. What connections do you feel with your ancestors, if you feel any at all? That could include your parents as well, or grandparents.
Well, obviously, I have a close connection to my parents. As you can see, the couple of times when I miss them, I don't get to see them, but um, uh, I had a close connection to my grandma Fraction and my grandma Johnson. Um, I'd stay with them both. I'd go and sleep over at their apartments. I helped them move many times. I had our family had a really close connection when I was living in the Twin Cities. We always, especially on the Fraction side, um, we always had family get-togethers at Thanksgiving. We always had family get-togethers at Christmas. Um, we were always over at one another's houses all the time. So I had a really close connection to them when I lived in Minneapolis. When I moved to Alaska, that connection wasn't nearly as strong. It was with my immediate family, but not my extended family. Although I did have uncles and cousins that will come up to visit and things like that. But um, that connection, like I had when I was actually living in Minneapolis, isn't there that much anymore. So that's what makes this project, I guess, even more interesting because it makes me learn a little bit more about my heritage, of which, frankly, I don't know a ton about.
Do you feel much of any connections with your ancestors with them being passed on?
What do you mean by that?
Even though they're not physically present here on Earth with us, do you still feel a connection to them? Like, have you ever experienced a spiritual connection with any of your ancestors in any way?
Well, my grandmother on my mother's side died on my birthday. And so I kind of have a connection with her. I remember her fondly, my grandma Johnson. Um, my grandmother, my grandma Fraction, I don't think about her a lot, but I know she influenced my life growing up with her. Uh, the only spiritual connection that I really had that I think I'm not a spiritual person. Let me just put it that way. I'm not a religious person. Um, However, the one spiritual connection I had was with my mother when she passed. Um, the day that she died, I was in bed and my phone rang. It woke me up, and I answered the phone and no one was there. And then 30 minutes later, I got a call and told me my mother was dead. And to this day, I believe that that was my mother letting me know. And the only recorded sound that I have is of my mother. And it's a voicemail that she left me on my birthday. We had this quirky thing in my family. I don't know if anybody's told you about this, but we do this really quirky thing. And on your birthday, you sing happy birthday as horribly as you can to the person. And the last voicemail that I have from my mother is her calling and singing horror. My mother was a beautiful singer. Took us to church all the time, my mom and dad. They were, by the way, that's another thing that as I talk, they were really into their church and they drug us to church all the time. We went to St. Peter's AME Church and I got drugged there all the time. And I just did it. I never really felt that connection to church at all. And even Timber Bay was a Christian camp. So I was used to that. But for lack of a better term, I didn't buy into it. I have my issues with religion for a multitude of reasons, but which I don't need to get into. But I don't have that because I've been disconnected from my family for so long. Those connections are with my uncles because I was gone 30 years almost. Well, I've been gone almost 40 years now. And so when I left, I was very young. And so those connections that you would build over time just weren't there. Um, and so if I had the strongest connection I think I would have is with my mom and my dad.
And that's completely understandable. And thank you for sharing that with me and being a little vulnerable in that space. Um, Kind of going a little bit back into the same question, though, with your ancestors, going back into your ancestors from Smithfield and Solitude plantations, all the way to your ancestors that you've met, your uncles and your aunts, your parents who have passed on. If you could speak with them now that they have passed on, and especially the ones that you've never met, what would you want them to know about you? And in general, what kind of conversation do you think you would have? What kind of questions do you think you would ask them if you were given the opportunity?
Hmm. I guess I would, as for questions I'd want to know, is how'd they do it? How did you put up with so much hate and disadvantage and still manage to thrive? How did you do it? And then I'd want to thank them for doing what they did. When you look back at what they had to go through and what they endured and what they had to overcome in order for me to have what I have now, I'd want to know how they did it and what kept them moving, not knowing what the future holds. And I'd want them to know who I am and what I'm trying to do to give back and to carry forward. But I think, when you ask me these questions about a connections with with my ancestors, I think if you ask me this question after I had an opportunity to visit the fraction house and visit where they were, I think my answers might be a little different because I don't have that connection. That connection's not real yet to me. And so it's hard for me to think about what I'd want to know from them other than how'd you do it? How'd you survive that?
Do you know, I know you say you haven't visited the plantations yet. Do you know much about the Mary Tree at all?
I know a little bit about it. I only know what my sister tells me. I have bits and pieces of it, but I don't know much about it. Again, I'm like 5,000 miles away from everybody.
You are indeed. You are pretty far away.
Yeah.
What kind of stories do you think the land of Virginia could tell based on what you know?
During what time?
Especially when it has, especially the relevance when it comes to your family history of living at Solitude and Smithfield plantations.
What kind of stories? Ask that question again.
Considering the history of your family at Smithfield and Solitude plantations, being enslaved there, living there and servicing people there, and following their enslavement, based on anything that you know about your family history, but also of just American history, what stories do you think the land of Virginia could tell?
Well, it could probably tell what their life was like, um, what their opportunities were or were not. Um, I'm sure it would tell stories of other people, non-African Americans, who helped um, them. Um, it might explain how we ended up so spread out all over the place. Um, it might explain, slave trade in general, they just broke up families, split them apart, and without regard to siblings and husbands and wives and things like that. And so it would tell the story of suffrage, and it would tell the story of prosperity, and it would tell the story of success and perseverance and determination.
And I think that's very reflective of not just your story, but of the story that you and your siblings and your other relatives share with us. That your family very much understood the value of tenacity and always kept going and kept striving forward. And considering those lessons that you've learned and all the experiences that you've had, I'm curious to know what message you would want to share with your own descendants.
Well, I tell my kids to be yourself. I've told my kids the the crossroads story a million times. Always speak your mind, keep an open mind, never give up. And frankly, you're just going to run into assholes out throughout your life, and you're just going to have to learn to deal with them. You may work with one, and you need to learn how to deal with that. And you got to understand compromise. And, you're not always going to be right. And you should be willing to change your opinions should the facts tell you that your opinion is incorrect. And never be afraid to enter into the unknown. And you can do anything you want if you put your mind to it.
What does reconciliation with this history of slavery mean to you?
Well, a lot. That's a loaded question.
It is indeed.
Because reconciliation means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Some people just say, you ever watch Dave Chappelle?
I've seen a little bit about him.
Okay. Dave Chappelle, he's a comedian, and he did and are you talking about reconciliation or reparations?
Reconciliation.
Okay. All right.
Now, reparations may be included in reconciliation. It depends on. See, that's why I'm asking your perspective, because it does mean a lot of different things to different people. But I'm curious on your perspective. What does that mean? What would that look like to you, reconciling the history of slavery?
So to me personally, reconciling is just coming to grips with the past and understanding the past. I can't change what happened. I just can't. I can't change what happened yesterday. I can't change what happened 100 years ago, and I can't change what happened 200 years ago. But I need to understand it so we make sure it doesn't happen again. And so for me, reconciling it is understanding what happened, teaching the people moving forward that this is what happened, not changing it, the good and the bad. There's a lot of people out there that want to erase all the bad part of what happened in history and only show history in a good light. We should show the good and the bad. And we need to reconcile. Now, I'm not just saying that with white people, Black people as well. We got to reconcile the things that we've done, as a society, as a race as well, and come to grips with that, because it hasn't been all cherries and candy, you know what I mean? And so to me, reconciliation is just reconciling the past and making sure it never happens in the future.
And considering your family's history, including and since slavery, how do you think the legacy of your family history continues to impact you and your relatives today?
That's a tough one, because I like to think that my path was my own path. And I didn't know much about my family's past or my legacy. And I don't know, other than I know there was a bunch of tenacious people ahead of me that leapfrogged me into this position. But I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question.
Okay, that's okay. And it's understandable considering your relationship to how much you know about your family history.
Right. Of all my brothers and sisters, I probably know the least. Again, and that's because I'm so far away. and I'm not connected to, even when I go back to visit with my brothers and sisters now, in some ways I feel like an outsider, um, because I don't have that connection, that daily connection that my brothers and sisters have, with one another. And so when I fly back and I'm visiting with family, it's uh, it's difficult for me to connect or feel like I'm part of it, because I'm not. I am, but I'm not. You know what I mean?
That's okay. Thank you for sharing that. I would love to honestly have another, like a post or a part two of our interview if you ever were to go back and visit Smithfield and Solitude plantations. I would love to learn what that experience would be like for you.
Well, I do go. How far away? Let me ask you this question: how far away is it from Washington D.C.?
It's probably about 7 hours or so, give or take. It is in Southwest Virginia, so it's pretty long distance away.
Yeah, I live in Alaska. That 7 hours is.
It's definitely closer than Alaska.
Yeah. That's not a. I say that because I also work on cases in Washington D.C. and I might be doing a trial there at some point again. But um, I've always wanted to get back there and do it. But I would be definitely open to do that. It's just a matter of traveling to the East Coast for me is not the funnest thing to do because of the time zone change. But and I'm generally in and out real quick, real fast, so it really messes with my body clock. But I think if I, when I say I feel like I've kind of ventured out on my own, I do feel like I ventured out on my own. I'm my own person, and I've been gone so long that those connections, while they are there, they're not nearly as strong as they would have been if I probably would have stayed in Minneapolis. And so I never really think about that much. I kind of always thought of myself as my own person, and um, and I have a very close connection with my kids and my wife. Um, but I don't communicate with my brothers and sisters on a daily basis, not even on a monthly basis. I probably talk to my sister Valerie more than I talk to any of my siblings. Um, so I don't know. I just sometimes I kind of just feel like I'm out on my own.
I think it's really beautiful though that you were able to still bring those same values that you learned from your family to a new place and kind of I look at it like you kind of sharing those values and sharing those experiences with a new place, with a new community, and being able to bring that light to a new place. That's kind of how I look at it. And you being able to build your family elsewhere. I think that's beautiful.
Well, clearly, well, I'll say this: I came from a family. None of my relatives that I can think of ever went to prison. I didn't have anybody that I could think of that went to prison. No uncles. They all worked. My uncle Carl was a chemist. My my uncle Bunky, on my dad's side, he was a educator. Um, Engineers, officers. They were all professional people, and so that was my what I saw, and so that's what you do. Um, all my cousins, all professionals. A lot of them college educated, or uh, in some sort of professional trade. And so, if there's anything, that legacy that was built on me, it was that core of what I saw growing up young, of all these professional young black men, and professional women. I come from a family of very strong black women. And so I'm not afraid. I have a very strong wife too. And so I'm not afraid of strong women. I love strong women, because, I like people to speak their mind. I don't want somebody to be subservient to me. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a partner in life. And so growing up, that's what I knew. So if there is any connection in regards, I guess I should take that back. I'm not alone. It's because what I saw, what I growing up, is what I'm trying to achieve, because that's what they achieved, and I'm just trying to do this, as best I can. Um, and so I guess maybe that answers your question: is how does their legacy affect me? It's that generation, my mom and dad's generation, that affected me the most, because I knew so little of the generation before that. Still do.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I don't know if you're aware, but Virginia Tech actually sits on the land of Solitude and Smithfield plantations where your family was formerly enslaved. I'm curious to know what you would want students at Virginia Tech to understand about the land that their school sits on.
I did know that, that it was the former plantation, so I did know that. What I would want the students of Virginia Tech to understand is what happened there, um, and that how slavery affected, and to this day continues to affect, the African American community, and how important, even though that was the site of enslavery, how important that is. It goes back to what I was saying previous, that we need to learn from the past to make sure that we don't commit these atrocities in the future.
Your family's history did not begin and end with American slavery. I'm curious to know what else you would like us to know about your family, aside from the things you shared already.
You mean my family up here or my family in general?
You can answer however you would like.
I like to think that our family is very diverse. Um, my wife is German. She's from Germany. Um, my daughter's husband is from Ireland. And so he's an Irish citizen and he's an American citizen. And so I like to think I like to believe our family is a matriarchal family. Um, I tell people I come from a matriarchal family. I have very strong women in my family. I'm not afraid of strong women, like I said. And I like to think that I have a close family and that we understand the importance of family. And I'd like them to know that that a family as a whole can be successful if the family works together. You bring everybody up. My wife is daycare for my grandkids. My daughter lives just right up the road from us. Her and her husband and her two kids, and we have a third one on the way.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Another little girl. Um, I have a very strong daughter, very strong willed. Um, my son is a lot like me, kind of quiet, in some ways, just like my dad um, was. I'm probably more talkative than my dad, but and my son is kind of outgoing, so that shell is kind of being broken a little bit more. But I'd like people to know that I'm proud of my family and I'm proud of my heritage, and I'm proud of the success in my family, and that our family is an example of hard work and persistence and education. Because I think most of the women in our family are educated, highly educated. They're all the doctors and the lawyers and things like that. All the men are kind of more of the blue collar police officers and managers, and I guess I'm not a blue collar, I guess, but um, a lot of the men are blue collars that are married to very strong women. Um, so um, I don't know. This is hard. I've never really thought about these questions before. I just kind of go about my life, you know.
I don't think much of anyone thinks about these questions every day.
I don't think I've ever thought of them at all. Is where I just go about my life. My life is very busy as it is right now.
I can only imagine as chief investigator.
Well, I'm coming to the end of that. But in addition to that, over the career, I've been um, a Cub Scout master, a soccer coach, basketball coach. I ran a nonprofit ski club for 14 years for high school and middle school kids. Um, I run a golf association, a golf league. I'm an avid golfer. That's one thing I carried on from my dad. Is my dad was an avid golfer, and he used to take me out to the golf tournaments with him when I was a young boy, and he would buy me hot dogs at the golf course. That's what I remember, is buying hot dogs and riding in the cart. And he played in these golf tournaments and just loved it. And so I picked up the game of golf and absolutely love it. And so I'm run a golf league. My son's a golfer. I help run a golf tournament in Hawaii. I've been helping that for a couple of years. I'm building. I build. I learned how to build, and so I'm on my. I don't know. In the big scheme of things, I'm probably on my fourth or fifth building, um, but I'm on my third building on my property. I'm building a second 1,700 square foot shop that I'm in the middle of construction on right at the moment. That I've done most of the work. My wife and I have done most of the work ourselves, except for concrete, electric, and the plumbing.
Wow. What else have you built?
I have a horse barn. Well, let me back up a little bit. So the property we're living on is a 6-acre property that we bought square. We are looking for a horse property. My wife wanted horses for her and her daughter, my daughter, and so we were looking around for horse property. But we're not rolling in the dough. And if you buy existing horse property, that's very, very expensive. And it was outside of our range to purchase. And so we found this house that we're living in now on 6 acres. It was flat, but it was completely wooded. So we developed it ourselves. We've been developing it for over 20 years. And so I have cleared 5.5 acres. When we bought it, there was probably this was about a half acre was cleared. I cleared it all. We cleared it ourselves. And that took about 10 years to clear it. I built a 1,700 square foot horse barn with 2 horse stalls in it. It has a 24 by 48 paddock area, a 60-foot round pen. I built a 100 by 200 riding arena outside. I built 2 pastures for our horse, did all the fencing. I have I built a building we call the Happy Hut, which we're converting into a sauna right now. That's a 16 by 16 building that we're converting into a sauna. The 1,700 square foot shop that I'm building. I helped my father-in-law finish 3 log cabins. I helped him build an addition onto his main log cabin at the time in his cabin room. But it's a 2-story addition. I helped him build to kit cabins, constructions, and just little miscellaneous stuffs. I've helped friends with remodels and things like that. But I learned all that myself, me and YouTube.
Good old reliable YouTube.
They got an answer for everything.
Someone's always doing something.
Yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to talk about that I haven't thought to ask, or something that you wanted to return to from our interview?
Growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood shielded me from a lot of things. It shielded me from a lot of while I experienced racism and things, it shielded me from poverty. It shielded me from crime. It shielded me from a lot of things that a lot of people in the African community experience every day. And it wasn't until I started this job as a criminal defense investigator, and I started meeting a lot of young Black men charged with crimes. And it opened my eyes to the world that I was shielded from. Terrible upbringings, not all of them, but a life that I wasn't familiar with. And over the course of my career, I've been doing criminal defense work now for almost 30 years. Over the course of my career, I have made it a goal that if I can help one or two young Black men get out of the criminal justice system, which is inherently unfair to minorities. It really is. I mean, people are not making that up when they say the criminal justice system is biased. It is. I've witnessed it firsthand. I've been fighting it for years. And I take every opportunity. I've told the Crossroads story many times to many young men in jail, hoping that maybe I could change the course of their life, and expressing the values that my parents taught me, because a lot of these young men didn't have fathers, did not live in a household that was loving. A lot of them were neglected. A lot of them were just told to get into the criminal world or do what you can. And it's been sad for me. It's been one of the most difficult things that I've had to witness in my entire life. Seeing all these smart, talented young men just thrown to the side. And women, don't get me wrong, and women. And it's been hard for me. And I feel very blessed and very lucky that my parents were able to provide for us in a way that would allow the success that I've had. And I'm really, really trying to pass that along to others. And I really hope that as part of this project that you're doing here, you can teach people the inherent unfairness that they put on people just based on the color of their skin. And it's sickening to me. And I hope this whole project, I think one of the things was to help people understand what happened in the past or what was going on and how people overcome this stuff. And I want people to understand. And I've met people, don't get me wrong, I've met people that have been in the criminal justice system. There's one gentleman who I volunteer a lot for our local homeless shelter. We serve food for our soup kitchen, and we box lunch. I've been doing this for 20 years, going down and serving meals and boxing lunches and things like that. One of the gentlemen, there's a place, it's called Beans Cafe, and one of the head cooks there, his name is Aaron. Sorry, his name is Aaron Dollison. Aaron, his family in particular, they seem to, there's a lot of them in prison, which we're kind of getting to this story where I'm proud of the fact that all my siblings, I can't think of one that was been in prison, where in the Dollison family, I could rattle off a number of them, women and generations. I mean, there's generations of them. But Aaron, he was in prison for 10 years, I think he was. He got out. And we just kind of hit it off. He's a very nice man. He's in his 40s. I guess he's a young man. I'm in my 60s, so he's in his 40s. And I was at Beans one time, and he came up to me, and he goes, Bruce, I got to show you something, because he was happy. He was almost off probation. He was completely off paper. He's got his life back together. He had a good job, and he was looking at buying a car. And one day he came up to me, and I was there working, and he goes, Bruce, I just bought my first car. And he was so proud of that. This is a guy in his 40s. And he wanted to show me this car. And so we went out and he showed me. It was a used car. It was nothing fancy or anything like that. It probably cost about $5,000, not a lot. But he was extremely proud of it. And the feeling that I saw, it made me feel so good that, he can see the benefit of hard work, and not everything is handed to you. And so many people these days, especially in the day of the internet, everything's instantaneous, and they just want, kids getting out of college want to be paid the highest salary that somebody's been doing for 20 years. No, you got to prove yourself. And so he was very proud of this. And, I was really happy for him. And then about a year later, he came up to me and he goes, Bruce, I have great news. And I'm like, well, what is that? He says, I just bought my first fourplex. And he bought a house. It's a fourplex. And he's living in there. He's off paper. And he's the shining example of you can break this cycle, something that I talk about all the time. And I'm not blaming my clients or anything for what they're there for. I mean, obviously they make poor choices. But when you look back at how they got there, it would appall you. And here's somebody that came out. And so anyway, I just want people to know that for myself, I'm trying as hard as I can to help change the cycle and help our society move forward.
Well, thank you. I think that's a perfect conclusion to our interview. I want to express my sincerest appreciation for your willingness to share your story with us and for helping us keep this history alive.
I appreciate it too. I hope I wasn't rambling on too much.